right, 10th grade. Today we are starting with imperialism in Africa. Quick heads up. We're changing the structure a little bit. So what you should be anticipating now is that instead of me pausing for you to answer questions, I'm going to do the entire lecture through. And then at the end, you're going to complete an exit ticket that is breaking down the prompt, writing a thesis, choosing the correct context, and breaking down a document. So you're going to do all of that once you're done with this lecture. Cool. With that in mind, we're going to get started. So first, the context of imperialism in Africa. So basically what was going on before 1880? Because imperialism in Africa basically went from 1880 to 1913. Cool, so first in Africa. By 1880, only about 10% of Africa was actually colonized or under the control by Europeans. That was Angola by the Portuguese, South Africa by the British, and Algeria by the French. Oh, and also Mozambique by the Portuguese. But the basic idea is that Europe did not try to control a lot of Africa. And that's for a couple reasons. One, large parts of the continent were just very difficult for the Europeans to go to. A lot of it was still unmapped by European standards. And also, if Europeans tried to go to certain parts of Africa, they were liable to die from disease, such as malaria. So it just wasn't feasible for Europeans to try to set up large empires. Second, Asia was viewed as an area that had a lot more wealth and an area that Europeans could gain from trade with Asian empires, or by controlling area, they could get a lot of really good raw resources or places to sell goods. Not only that, North America was still viewed as a place you could make money off of. So overall, Africa was seen like if you wanted to make money, you would go to either Asia or to North America. Lastly, the European presence that was there was usually through trading posts or forts. So these are areas where Europeans had built small forts or trading posts where they were basically used as stations for European ships to stop and refuel and to resupply, and for the Europeans to trade with the local population. So not really something that was offensive or controlling, but more just a little bit of area to serve as a safe spot. Now onto Europe. Europe at this time had gone through some important industrial changes. One, new industrial technology is now going to allow Europe to actually travel throughout Africa feasibly. Steam ships, railroads, and telegraphs are going to allow Europeans to communicate, travel faster, cheaper than ever before. So now it becomes more feasible for Europe to actually be able to take part in African colonization. Second, we have new European countries, or recently rising European countries, that did not get to take part in the colonization of North America back in the 16 through 1800s, or the colonization of Asia through the early 1800s. So they feel left out. The three major ones are Germany, Italy, and Belgium. Those three are going to view Africa, are now coming up without colonies and feeling like they are behind France, England, the Netherlands, or Portugal, who have already developed colonies and a lot of wealth through this colonization. Next, we're going to go to our causes of imperialism in Africa, which is going to go from about 1880 to 1950. First is our economic causes. European countries are finding out that they have a pretty bad economic problem. That is that thanks to industrialization, they are now producing way more than they can actually consume in Europe. So that means they're losing money as all these goods they're making are not being consumed and bought. Not only that, this has been made worse because of a new policy known as neo-mercantilism. So if we look at our economic policies we've learned at so far, our first major one was mercantilism, which was that protection of trade, that protection of production within a country, trying to make sure you sell more than you buy, things like that. This was overtaken by free trade in the late 1700s and early 1800s, where you're supposed to take away rules, allow as much trade as possible, things like that. But as the 1800s goes on, and more countries are industrializing, that means more and more European countries are producing goods, trying to make their own goods. This is happening even within Asian states as well. Then we have this return of mercantilism and neo-mercantilism. So European countries especially are passing more tariffs, are passing more laws to make it so their country buys less goods from other European countries, and they themselves are now having basically less options. So now every European country has less people they can sell to within Europe, and they're producing more than ever before. So Africa is now viewed as an economic necessity. They could go conquer these African states and sell goods to them and have a market where they can make sure that all these goods they're producing are actually bought and consumed. Not only that, of course, raw resources are always seen like a good financial bet. Rich European businessmen or banks or things like that view raw resources is a really important and good investment opportunity. And Africa has all this potential untapped raw resources for them to use. Specifically, a couple new ones that are becoming a lot more important, such as rubber. So this economic need of both raw resources, as always, but also as a place to sell goods becomes very, very important. Our second big cause of imperialism in Africa is strategic rivalry and nationalism kind of put together. So what I mean is that Europe by the late 1800s is starting to have less and less wars within Europe, but competition is now shifting towards how do we compete economically and strategically overseas. One, navies or steamships are becoming a lot more important. With that, it becomes more important that you have control of trade routes and important shipping lanes. Africa plays a huge role. As to get to Asia, you have to sail by Africa in multiple areas. And so one big push for these African colonies is to create bases or military bases where your ships can stop off, refuel, and project power in important trade areas. So this projection of power and military usefulness, African colonies are viewed as a huge strategic resource. A great example of this is the Suez Canal in Egypt. Egypt is colonized by the British almost purely for the point that the British wanted to control the Suez Canal so they could travel quickly to India. So that's one huge strategic reason. Another, of course, is the manpower that Africa can provide. Every colonial citizen is viewed as a potential person that could fight for your military, and so these African colonies are viewed as these huge providers of manpower to fight in European militaries, both to preserve the colonial empires, but also to fight in potentially other wars. And so these colonies are viewed as potential. I'm repeating myself basically, but it is viewed as potential for manpower to fight in Europe. Lastly, we have nationalism. As nationalism grows more and more and more powerful within Europe, specifically this idea that you are part of a country, you care about this country, you want your country to be the best, and this competition starts to grow. Nationalism pushes European countries to want to have the most colonies. It is literally a sign of power and a sign of prestige that you have the most colonies. This is especially true for those countries I mentioned in the context who are behind colony-wise. Germany, Italy, and Belgium. They are pushed to try to get as much colonies as possible. And so once people start colonizing Africa, it becomes we all need colonies in Africa or else we are behind. So this feeling of nationalism really pushes colonization. Cool, so now we're going to head to our methods of colonization and how the Europeans actually colonize these areas. First, we have this unique change, which is actual European diplomacy to set up this colonization. Our example is the Berlin Conference, 1884 to 1885. Basically, with the start of colonization in Africa, there is a fear that this would lead to more wars and more conflicts. So Otto von Bismarck, the leader of Germany, hosted this Berlin Conference where all European representatives gathered with no African representation, mind you, just European states, to literally divide up Africa. Some basic things that are set up is how is trade going to work? How is travel going to work? What are the rules for declaring a colony? And basically during this time, Europeans divided up their areas of influence within Africa and kind of preset who was going to get what area. The whole point of this was to make sure there was less conflict would happen. Now, these rules were often broken, but at least gave a framework for how European countries would share and split Africa. So European diplomacy on how to actually set up Africa was a huge part of it. Of course, Europeans' military strength is going to be a big reason why this colonization happens. Africans have various military strength. So Africans on the coast who have been trained with Europe for a while have legitimate gunpowder weapons, so they are usually older models. Africans in the interior at times have basic spear and shield weaponry. But the most important part is that Europeans with their brand new industrial technology can by far outclass African militaries. Especially if one of their new weapons, known as the Maxim gun, the first ever machine gun, allows small European forces to beat much larger African armies. And so this European military strength is going to allow them to colonize and control areas much larger than their own countries. Second is the use of Africans themselves. This happens in two ways. One, the Europeans are really good at using African rivalry between each other. So something we need to clear up is to make sure that the way we view Africa now is much different than before. Africans do not view themselves as Africans. That's a relatively new idea. It's important to understand that Africans still viewed themselves at a tribal level. It would be much more important that your tribe is successful, that your tribe succeeds. And so it wasn't uncommon for African tribes to view European countries as ways to tip the balance in rivalry. That Africans would actually sign allegiances and would work with Europeans to get an upper hand against rivals, not knowing that they were actually helping Europeans gain power in this area until it was too late. So one way the Europeans used Africans was using their tribal rivalries, their conflicts, their disagreements with each other as a way to make sure there was no united front against European colonization, instead turn Africans against each other. This also happened when Europeans started ruling in Africa. They would often put minority tribes in power. This made Africans fight each other and made the minority tribe rely on European support to stay in power. Europeans also just used Africans in their militaries. Often much or most of the European army that was fighting in Africa was actually made up of Africans who were paid for, trained by Europeans. Once again, this is because Africans did not view themselves as united African front. It is okay if you fight for the Europeans, if they're paying you, if you can support your family, if your tribe is protected. That's much more important than like preventing Europeans altogether. Cool, so that's the end of our lecture. You're going to go end here. Make sure you get your notes down, sent to me. Go and complete that exit ticket. That exit ticket is going to have two parts. You're going to have the paper, the Google Doc, where all the exit tickets are actually located. Make sure you answer all those questions, though, on the Google Sheet. It's much easier for me to grade and it helps me out. So make sure you follow the directions carefully. You'll be good to go.